the late great comedian George Carlin was on an episode of Bill Maher's old show, Politically Incorrect, where he talked about how there used to be seven oil companies, now there are three, and pretty soon there'll be two. And then he says everything that's important to the country in terms of choice is being reduced. However, what is going up is essentially things like your choice of 32 flavors of ice cream.
So maybe there's a way in which e-commerce lends itself to a kind of natural monopoly. But in that case, maybe we should rethink any company that starts to control, say, like 40, 50, maybe close to 60% of e-commerce as people estimate that the Amazon does, and say, wow, this has become almost like a utility.
Welcome to the neutral ground. Alexa, play the Neutral Ground podcast.
Sorry, I don't know that one. But you can ask me to recommend a podcast.
Yeah, I got a recommendation for you. Recommend you. Well, despite its problems and clear lack of taste, Amazon has achieved quite an amazing feat. It's completely woven itself into the fabric of our culture. Whether it's offering 2-day free shipping, reading reviews that help us make our consumer decisions, and even watching movies and exclusive shows, Amazon has placed itself in an interesting position in our lives. But are there hidden, and some quite apparent, costs underneath the surface that we conveniently sweep under the rug? The rug and sweeper, of course, having been purchased on Amazon. My guest, Dr. Emily West, believes so. She's written quite an engaging book on the matter entitled Buy Now: How Amazon Branded Convenience and Normalized Monopoly. Dr. Emily West is a professor of communication at the University of Massachusetts Amherst, where she does research and teaching on media, digital platforms, and promotional culture. She has published about Amazon, activism on social media, nationalism in media, and greeting cards as a form of communication. In this episode, we talk about how Amazon maximizes its distribution model and the hidden costs that this can have on workers, how it has been able to change what the words buy and own mean, despite having a class action lawsuit brought against it, and even how it's able to control our very desires. I hope you enjoy my conversation with Dr. Emily West. Emily, welcome to the Neutral Ground. We're going to be talking about one of the biggest companies in the world and how it has shifted the fabric of our culture. That company is none other than Amazon. We're going to be using your book, Buy Now: How Amazon Branded Convenience and Normalized Monopoly, as our guide. I want to begin our conversation by asking you to clarify a term that is used throughout the book, and really it's kind of the crux of your argument, or at least it's incredibly important for understanding it. And that term is ubiquitous presence. What is ubiquitous presence in relation to your study? And how and why is it a concept that we should be more aware of?
Yeah, well, thank you so much for having me on your show. And you really got to the heart of an important concept in the book. In fact, I tried to convince the publisher to call the book Branding Ubiquity, but they would not go for that. So, and I'm just super happy with the title, because Buy Now is very relatable, and we all, many of us are familiar with that button on Amazon's site. But, in a way, one of the take-home ideas that I had from after thinking about and looking into Amazon for a number of years was this idea that it had branded its own ubiquity. So I think that's somewhat in contrast, I think, with the ways that we've thought about prominent brands and how they work. So we often think about prominent brands, maybe like Nike or Disney, as things that announce their distinctiveness and specialness, and that offer something aspirational that we are aiming towards, or that we think is going to be transformative. But Amazon, its branding logics are different. It in a way, brands, as its ubiquity, it's the fact that it can be with us all the time, its everydayness. In a way, Amazon, like, seeks to fade into the background, almost like the way those Echo smart speakers are so, subtly designed. Like it's just going to be literally part of your furniture. And Amazon is wanting to do that, and has achieved that, from being ubiquitous on our doorsteps and porches, with these boxes, these Amazon boxes, very utilitarian, showing up on a regular, perhaps increasingly regular basis for some people. But it's as it has expanded into more products and services, it truly has become more ubiquitous in our lives and our homes. If you think about if you watch or use Prime Video or listen to Prime Music, and especially now that Amazon has moved into the Internet of Things, right? Certainly the Echo smart speaker, but also a lot of its home security and smart home devices, and that are networked and in conversation with its huge cloud computing business, Amazon Web Services, which is an even more ubiquitous infrastructure of the internet that actually many of us are not aware that we're indirectly using all the time. So it's both pointing out Amazon has become ubiquitous, but thinking about the strategies that it's used to kind of brand and communicate or make us feel comfortable with that ubiquity.
That's a perfect primer for all the places that we're going to be going with this conversation. You touched upon a lot of the different areas that I wanted to focus on for this conversation. I want to also ask this. So, what I found interesting in your book was actually a story about how Amazon didn't really invent this concept of trying to become ubiquitous in terms of its presence in the consumer home. Can you talk a little bit about the parallels and maybe some of the differences as well, if they're there, that you found between the once Titan company Sears and Amazon?
Yeah, so in an early chapter, as much as my book seems to say, let's talk about Amazon. Amazon is so important and so special. I also don't want to overstate that Amazon is doing stuff that's never been done before. In fact, Sears is such a great, I'm glad you picked up on that, precursor and comparative company. Sears was known as the everything store, colloquially as, Amazon has come to be known. And, like Amazon started with one product. So if you're old enough to remember that Amazon started out selling books online, but none of us are old enough to remember that Sears started out as a catalog store for watches, and then moved out from that initial product category into selling more and more things via this sort of, the idea of shopping via catalog. So, there's a lot of great comparisons too, if we think about the way that the founder of Sears recognized the power of the railway as an important form of distribution, like emergent form of distribution that was going to make something like catalog shopping possible to even rural areas. In a similar way, Jeff Bezos recognized the power of the internet. Obviously, we don't necessarily get all our products via the internet, although now we do get some, right, like ebooks. But the ways that e-commerce was going to be revolutionary, and he recognized that and took advantage again of this sort of emergent technology. So yeah, and Sears became, I think it's somewhat ubiquitous in people's communities, in some ways in people's homes. If you can think about that Sears catalog showing up, a couple times a year. And people really trusted Sears. That's one of the things I mentioned about Amazon, is the level of trust and affection in a way that it's built up with users. And there's, historical work has looked at the ways that people saw Sears almost like a utility, as something that you might be able to trust to help you out with all kinds of things. And the fact, for example, that Sears found it advantageous to have their own lines of certain products, right? Like, so to have, to go to a prominent, say, manufacturer of appliances and say, okay, you're going to make a line of appliances and we'll put our own special Sears brand on it. because in fact, the Sears brand in a way would almost trump these even well-known brands, say of tires or of washing machines. So yeah, there's a lot of interesting parallels there. But of course, Sears did not have quite the right timing or foresight to get into e-commerce. There's a alternative history, where we're all buying things on Sears.com, that didn't just quite pan out because of, choices that were made, or, where they put their energies at a very particular, sensitive moment. So they were not able to take advantage of the kinds of first mover advantage and network effects that Amazon was able to as a kind of early mover in e-commerce.
I'm definitely old enough to remember growing up, and when a washing machine broke down, my parents very much were like, we're going to go to Sears first. We're going to check out Sears for appliances. It was a very, as you said, you were buying not so much even the brand of the washing machine or the appliance, you were buying into Sears. And for anybody who's worked in retail and sales at all, eventually you hit a certain point where you realize I have to help the customer buy into me to realize that I'm not trying to pull one over on them. I'm trying to connect with them in a way that says, this is what I honestly think is the best thing that you should get, and here's why. And so it's fascinating reading your book. I never thought about just how much work someone like Bezos and even Sears earlier, just how much work they put into this idea of what we can't be is simply a store. We have to be something greater than that. And I'll touch upon that even a little bit more specifically in a little bit. But you mentioned something earlier that I'd like to dive into a little bit more. You mentioned you don't want this necessarily to just be about Amazon, and I think you do a really good job. To your credit, you do bring in other big companies. And so for the sake of the audience, because I'm sure they're thinking about this a little bit, you bring in Google Alphabet, you talk about Walmart, of course. What makes the Amazon discussion a more pressing one?
Yeah, I think what brought me to write about Amazon actually was at the time when I first started to think about it. I felt like it had been given a little bit of a pass, that both journalists and scholars were interested in, like, big tech, and starting to be quite critical, and had been, I think, for a number of years, about its power, and how rapidly we'd achieved or come to see tremendous market concentration in this realm of the internet economy, which had always been conceptualized as, oh, the internet is so great because there's small barriers to entry, and like there's unlimited shelf space, and there's so there was a sense that this was going to be a space for competition and innovation. And yet, within a very short number of years, actually, it's become a tremendously concentrated, even more concentrated in a lot of ways than, say, legacy media companies. Is the sort of the big tech, information and communication technology space. But Amazon, to my mind, at least at the time, and this is pre-pandemic, say in like around 2016, 17, to my mind, was getting a pass. It was sort of like had succeeded so well into branding its own ubiquity and fading into the woodwork. And to my mind, part of the reason was that it was associated with shopping, right? And we don't think of shopping as like the most serious or important thing, but it's shaping our economy. The turn to e-commerce is shifting our main streets and patterns and opportunities in employment. It's both creating and perhaps foreclosing opportunities for small businesses of different kinds. And I also, like, I'm a student or a scholar of consumer culture, so I think that like the things that we buy and the places that we buy them actually are part of our culture, so are tremendously important. So it wasn't all, apparent, for example, in the same way that it would have been with Google or Facebook, that this was all, that these changes were important to things like politics, right? Like electoral politics and things like that. That being said, Amazon's um, structures of distribution and the kinds of gatekeeping that it ends up putting into place is tremendously influential on things like the information or entertainment that we end up accessing, right? So the way algorithms are recommending videos to us on Prime Video or books, or the ways that the reviews are being gamed, right, by different stakeholders, can pertain to both products and to informational content like documentaries and books. And then there's the labor piece, of course, that I think for a while now has been really prominent in thinking about Amazon. So some of the places I land in the book and thinking about, reflecting on platform power, some of those reflections I think pertain also to other large tech companies. But I did want to kind of, hone in on Amazon and say, no, you don't get to like hide behind and be like the sort of hide behind the Facebook and Google and the sort of more memorable scandals that they have, like Cambridge Analytica. You have like tremendous power too. In some ways, I think truly rivaling, the power of these other tech giants. And so it seemed to me just overdue for some hard look.
As you're talking there, and you mentioned the idea of reviews, you made me think of something that's going on right now in entertainment in places like Rotten Tomatoes, where people review shows and movies and whatnot. And we have this idea of review bombing. People who go in and they'll give a particular show or movie a low score or a high score. It works both ways too, which is kind of funny. They'll do it before the show or the movie even comes out. And because of that, Rotten Tomatoes had to kind of scramble to try to figure out, well, what do we do here? What's going on? But as you kind of point out, have a section about this in your book where you talk about how Amazon kind of, maybe it certainly didn't invent an idea of reviewing, but they really did a great job of figuring out way before everybody else that this is a really powerful tool that you connect with the early stages of Web 2.0 and that idea of a more interactive web experience. And once again, we find ourselves with Bezos and this idea of timing, and they don't seem. Every so often, someone will say, I'm not sure I trust the reviews here on this or that. But man, they have really they worked on it early and got it to a place where most people just kind of move right past it. How did they do that? How were they able to get in so early on this idea of the importance of reviews and consumer interaction?
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up. And actually, it allows me to elaborate on the question of reviews, which I do touch on in the book, but I've written about subsequently in a little bit more depth. I think it gets to the heart of a couple of aspects of Amazon's logic. So one is that its number one operating or leadership principle is customer obsession. So it wants to center the customer, and provide opportunities for engagement, or to get very accurate information, perhaps even unflattering information about things that are being sold on Amazon. And it speaks also to the ways in which Amazon is, in a way, more of a platform than a retailer. So thinking about the distinctions between those things. So a retailer would want to put its best foot forward on all the products it's selling because it's going to make money from selling you the thing, right? So the idea of the platform is like, no, we're just connecting consumers and sellers. And sometimes Amazon is the seller, but a lot of times it's third parties, and that developed, in the early 2000s. But even in the 1990s, when Amazon was sort of the seller, the retailer of all the books on the site, yeah, there was this sense of, and people thought it was crazy at the time, even people internally, that that Jeff Bezos and others in the leadership team thought, okay, anyone can post a review about any book. And people were like, there's going to be bad reviews, and then people won't want to buy the book. But again, coming back to this idea of customer obsession and the sort of platform thinking about it, which is like, we're just trying to connect you with the things that you want. Maybe this person didn't like this book, but someone else will like it. So I think, when people think about reviews, we do tend to think about Rotten Tomatoes and Yelp, but very early, like, we're talking, I think 96, 97, people could post reviews on the site. Now, I will say, I think there was a transitional moment because in the 90s and into the very early 2000s, Amazon also had a whole huge team of editorial staff that were providing professional reviews and recommendations. And so the kind of crowdsourced, Web 2.0, anyone can post a review thing was just alongside a sense of Amazon building itself up as a kind of authority on books and then music and movies. But eventually they just got rid of all those editors pretty much and said, you know what, people do this for free. We're crowdsourcing the review thing. And in a way, it makes Amazon, even if you don't buy stuff from Amazon, because some people choose not to, I bet you go there to find out about things. I bet you go there to find out about books, and I bet you go there to find out about a product, even if you then go see if you can find it somewhere else. Since then, of course, as you mentioned, reviews can be weaponized, gamed, there's brigading, there's a lot of disinformation, I'm going to say, in Amazon's review space, as there are. I think more so in Amazon's review space because it's such a destination for product information. So more than in other places, probably. There's a lot of so in turn, Amazon develops algorithms and systems to try and sniff out the bad reviews, and then in turn, companies or other companies that help those companies come up with systems to try and get around it. There's even like widgets you can put in your browser that will give you a sort of a reliability check on the reviews on Amazon. So there's like these third parties now that are helping both sellers try to improve their reviews and shoppers try to gauge the reliability of the reviews that they're looking at. So, just like everywhere on the internet now that has information that people find valuable, there's a tremendous struggle over trying to game that space and trying to keep it clean, I guess.
I'd never thought about this until just now. I mean, in reality, and this again speaks to the larger point that you make in your book, that it's not just a bookstore, right? And this is said early on. I'll quote, because you quote Bezos in 1999. So I'll quote it, and then this will kind of lead us also into this larger discussion about moving from a model of manufacturing to distribution, and the effects that actually kind of has, on really the cultural fabric, essentially. But in 1999, Bezos says, when we first started Amazon.com, we had very conscious discussions where we talked about the fact that we were not a bookstore, but we were a book service. Thinking of yourself as a store is limiting. Services can be anything. Thinking of myself back in 1999 and what I knew of Amazon, I probably would have read this and thought, what are you talking about? I buy my books from you. I buy them. That's, pretty much it. But in some ways, he was pretty much before his time in terms of understanding just how big. I'm not even sure Bezos would have understood how big this could be, quite honestly. And so that right there kind of leads us into this idea of distribution. And I want to set up a scenario for you, and then you take me through it and kind of walk through why we should be concerned. So let's say I'm someone with a factory and I manufacture widgets, and it's incredibly expensive to make my widgets. I'm not sure I could even include necessarily the money to add distribution to that. So I've got companies like Amazon and Walmart who can handle the distribution for me. So, why should we be concerned as, let's say, citizens, even, or businesses, in giving over that kind of power to companies like Amazon?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's new that there's a distinction in business activity between manufacturing and distribution. I think what is new, and I think again not brand new with Amazon, but probably really started more with Walmart, was tremendous concentration in distribution companies. So that this has been described as a shift from kind of a push economy where the manufacturers make things and then work with all the distributors to get it to consumers, to a pull economy where the greatest concentration of power is in distribution, in Walmart, say, or in Amazon. And it's those companies also, because of computing, know more about the market than the manufacturers do. And so they, especially Walmart is known for this, is sort of, they're the ones telling the manufacturers increasingly like what to make, how to make it, how many of them to make, what color they should be, how they should be merchandised or packaged, etc. And being is setting more and more challenging terms for manufacturers. And so I guess, in a way, everything has two sides to it, right? So like the benefit to the consumer is that there's more of exactly what we think we might want when we want it. Things are less likely to run out. They're using predictive algorithms, right, to figure out exactly when people are going to want to start buying for holidays, or there's a storm coming and so we need to get more water and more toilet paper in, things of that nature. So that's all been sped up and made much more precise. And I guess with Amazon too, what we've seen, I think, is truly an explosion in choice, right? Like, so now, you can see like 12 different versions of a specific kind of like electric toothbrush. You're never going to find like 12 different ones in the store, or maybe 30, and you can have small businesses who say, oh, but there isn't like one that's just this size that's pink, we'll make that kind, and then maybe it finds a market on Amazon. But I think where the concern comes is, again, and it's not a new issue, right, in American history. I mean, we've gone through waves of saying, wow, like too much market concentration can be bad. And what we've seen with Amazon, for example, is that in the early days, like it was so exciting and great for, manufacturers or small businesses to be selling on the site, and they could reach markets maybe that they hadn't before, or more and more shoppers were going there. So they're going where the shoppers are. But what's happened over time is that it's become less of like a great option and more of like a thing you have to do. And as that's become more and more true, Amazon has tightened the screws. And so they take a much higher percentage of sales in terms of various services that you are paying. They take a standard cut, right, for everything that you would sell through their site. But they also now, in essence, require, although not legally, but in terms of like, if you're going to be visible on the site, if you're going to get a good enough delivery time, if you're going to be findable, you're going to have to buy more and more services from Amazon. So I think it's really, shifting what's profitable about selling stuff to people from businesses, small and large, right, but a lot of small businesses in particular who sell on Amazon, and concentrating the revenues more and more towards Amazon, because they know that they're sort of the only game in town. And with the Prime membership, right, that locks so many people into just defaulting to buying on Amazon in a way that they might not have before, because in essence, they've already paid for the shipping, right? And so many of things are going to ship for free, and we also get the Prime Video, so we're going to stick with it, blah, blah, blah. And now like Amazon is the Google of searching for products, right? The vast majority of product searches are on Amazon, so you better be there. But we know that it's a pretty raw deal for a lot of people selling on Amazon. We know that the Amazon says they don't, but that there's many instances of them seeing what sells well at certain price points on the platform, and then going in and producing their own version of it and essentially putting out, that original successful seller out of business, or that original successful product out of business. So it's very ruthless. And I think to my mind, there's a lot of what seems to be very clear abuses of market power. And there's also just the sense of, like, again, like, we thought the internet was going to be a place where there were lots of choices and there'd be competition and innovation. And when so much of such an important and profitable business is concentrated with one player, we shouldn't be surprised when it's not advantageous, especially to sellers. And to my mind, in the long run, it's not going to be advantageous to consumers either, because if that's where all the products are being sold and that's where they know we're always coming, what is the incentive to keep prices low?
That reminds me of way back when the late great comedian George Carlin was on an episode of Bill Maher's old show, Politically Incorrect, where he talked about how there used to be 7 oil companies, now there are three, and pretty soon there'll be two. And then he says everything that's important to the country in terms of choice is being reduced. However, what is going up is essentially things like your choice of 32 flavors of ice cream, you know? And so his idea was that you're getting the illusion of choice in areas that continually keep us moving forward and feeling like we have this sense of agency. But in other areas, we don't even realize necessarily that our choices are being reduced. And in some ways, I think you point this out really quite well in the book. The more different platforms and different ways into the fabric of the culture that Amazon kind of integrates itself into, the more, in a sense, we are reducing a choice. Now, we often don't think of it that way, but it kind of is. Even just an example of I didn't realize that Amazon had bought Twitch. I didn't know that. But Twitch, of course, is a wonderful platform for people who like to stream gaming, to show themselves playing video games, and it produces quite a lot of money. And if you want to, you can try to stream on YouTube, but most of the serious gamers still stay on Twitch. And so again, even just the decision to not mess with the name Twitch and say, you know what, that name sells by itself, we can still reap the rewards. In some sense, that's still a reduction of choice. You still have to come through Amazon for that.
Yeah, and I think it's there's different ways of thinking about this, so we could try and imagine a different situation in which there were, say, 3 or 4 smaller e-commerce companies that you could check out each one. And how that would come about, I'm not sure. I mean, I think Amazon has such a hold on e-commerce, so maybe that would only come about by a kind of breaking up, that government would require, which is quite hard to imagine, actually. But you could also say that there's something that perhaps something like e-commerce, where what makes it you know work best is if there is a massive distribution network, which we know that Amazon has, right? This network of distribution centers, and now they moved into last mile delivery about 5 years ago, as opposed to contracting as much with other companies. And so maybe there's a way in which e-commerce lends itself to a kind of natural monopoly. But in that case, maybe we should rethink any company that starts to control, say, like 40, 50, maybe close to 60% of e-commerce, as people estimate that Amazon does, and say, wow, this has become almost like a utility, and we actually treat utilities different than just regular private companies. So we could ask questions like, should a company like Amazon be in the business of being the place where you find stuff, you buy it, and it gets delivered to you, right? Be in the business of distribution, and also be a major seller and be competing with its own clients on that same platform? I mean, I think that's a really valid question to ask, because again, it can use the business intelligence and its own brand recognition, to advantage its own products when it's supposed to be a platform, and one of the major ways that people find out what stuff can I get or how can I get my products in front of shoppers. So yeah, I think there's a way in which we've seen with the digital economy that there are advantages to the kind of network effects, economies of scale, right? As you say, like Twitch is a place where creators and viewers who share a certain set of interests and enjoy this live streaming format can gather, right? And then they can find other content, have it recommended to them, and build communities there. So there's something advantageous to that. Otherwise, people wouldn't have all flocked there. So I guess it's finding that line where it flips from it being advantageous to have Twitch being a space for gaming and live streaming that is held in common, or it's advantageous for Twitter to be like a public square. And when it flips into something that, has gone from having some kind of advantageous market power to having outsized political power, or starting to use that power in ways that are systematically disadvantaging those who are supposed to be benefiting from that space and preventing others from having any realistic chance of offering an alternative.
I remember ordering something on Amazon years and years ago, and it showed up on Sunday. And at the time, I thought it was like a mistake. I thought it was magic, because of course we always, we grew up with this idea of mail is not delivered on Sundays, certainly not packages. Although my understanding is, if you speak to postal workers, they'll say that there were certain special occasions where something could be delivered on Sundays. But for the majority of us, that was just not going to happen. And you mentioned this idea of how the company was able to gain a kind of political presence as well. And so here is, and I think it's, correct me if I'm wrong, I think it's 2014. I think this occurs maybe 13, where Amazon is actually able to gain a seat at the table with the Postmaster General, essentially, and bargain for Sunday delivery. To me, that's actually quite a feat to do, to have that much of a bargaining power to do that. So how was Amazon able to gain a seat at that table and negotiate private deals for deliveries on Sundays? How were they able to do that, to gain that kind of authority?
Because of their volume, right? And I think the U.S. Postal Service, of course, is in a very particular situation. So they have a mandate, right? They have to deliver things to every corner of this extremely large nation and offer kind of comparable services, and have post offices in tiny, tiny places and things like that. So they're a mission-driven kind of social service, if you will, incredibly important communication infrastructure that in a way makes the nation, you know what I mean? Like, and historically, did so. But it needs to run as a business. So it needs to, earn enough money to keep itself going. But a number of years ago, a law was passed that said it had to prepay all its health benefits for all of its employees, which I don't think pertains to any other federal service. So basically, it's an incredible dire straits. There's all kinds of like innovations, and like the post office could sell more stuff, right? I mean, I always go in there and I'm like, really? Like, this is all you're selling? Like, there's so many more useful things you could be selling, while I'm here. And if you go to other countries, you'll see that post offices have all kinds of like, cognate products and services that they use as forms of profitability, which actually our postal service is prevented from doing. So it's like, you have to do all this stuff, you can't do this stuff, you have to prepay your health benefits. Now I'm coming to the package thing, which is that in fact the most profitable part of the US Postal Service is its package delivery. And Amazon, I mean, it was never sort of like, I don't know that it was ever fully revealed what percentage of the US Postal Service's package business was from Amazon, but it was a massive amount. So yeah, I mean, again, like, yeah, it's unconscionable. It's not just like a standard market actor. Again, it's like Amazon, not a government entity, but almost acting like a kind of national utility and coming in and say, hey, we got to deliver on Sunday, and obviously made it worth the Postal Service's while to say yes. Who knows what kinds of tough, deals that they put down on the table. Maybe they were going to withdraw all their business and do it all through, UPS and FedEx. The Postal Service agreed to it, and then like 4 or 5 years later, Amazon started building its more local delivery centers and sending out its blue vans. So now, in fact, much fewer packages, I think, are coming through the Postal Service because Amazon moved into last mile delivery. So that's, I think, causing a major shift in that business. And I don't know if the postmaster regrets his decision from that year to expand to Sunday delivery, or if it was just a must do at that point from an economic standpoint. But it's a great example of the kind of outsized power that that Amazon has. And again, it's the sort of thing that, like, as consumers, we're not that likely to complain about. Like, who wants to be like, I don't want to get packages on Sunday? But on the other hand, is it that important? What did that mean for postal delivery workers? What did that mean to the financial health of the U.S. Postal Service? And is it so important? It's done in our name. It's done to advance our pleasure and convenience. But I don't think that we're ever fully privy to the costs of it.
By sheer coincidence, I finished reading your second chapter where you talk about this quite a bit. And then that night, uh, my wife and I had some friends over, and one of those friends actually works in the distribution side of a medical company. And his job is essentially he delivers really important medical supplies to people who need them. He was telling us a story that night about how the sales lead above him was selling the products to the people and making promises about when they would be there, like almost exact moments. And what we don't realize is behind those promises is a human being who's got to deliver on that. And here's my friend in a van running all around upstate New York, like what we call the capital region, and trying to make good on these promises. But in doing so, it's actually extended his workday. First, it was 12 hours, then it was 14, and then the max he said was one time he did 16 hours. And he had to have an uncomfortable conversation, even at one point, between the sales lead and the customer, because the sales lead promised something that was just not humanly possible by our laws of space and time. It was not going to be there. My question to you is this, and this might actually be, and I'd like your opinion on this as well, this might be the biggest, or one of the biggest slip ups, let's say, or mistakes that Amazon made. They like to stand behind their number of 2-day shipping, right? They came out with that very early and people love it. And you get the hints every so often that that might have proved even a little bit too much for them at certain times, right? Because they try to incentivize us to change that to, they'll give you $1 towards a digital, media product. My question to you is this. If Amazon and other companies, let's say even, were more transparent about how much pressure is placed on their workforce to meet these distribution promises, do you think we could shift the culture back a bit and even turn, let's say, 2-day shipping into something even just slightly more manageable, maybe 3-day shipping? Could we deal with that shift if we really knew what it was doing, let's say, to the people behind these promises?
Yeah, I think it's such a great point. I mean, there's so much kind of heartbreaking reporting about the productivity pressures that it's put on delivery workers, both those in the fulfillment centers and those on the road. And actually, the ones on the road for Amazon are typically subcontractors. But they're, even when you're a subcontractor, you're being constantly monitored and pushed. And there's, I think credible reporting that this is leading to accidents, that it makes creates a kind of unhuman, set of working conditions, and it makes these jobs not very sustainable. So at least in the warehouses, there's tremendous turnover, right? So it's quite common for these warehouses to have more than 100% turnover in a given year. And in fact, I mean, you mentioned the 2-day shipping promise. So that was the prime promise for a number of years. But a few years ago, they actually changed it to 1 day. Not on everything, but on millions of items that are prime eligible. And so they've only amped up the delivery promise. That's been their kind of killer app, if you will, like the thing that has drawn people to Amazon. It's set industry standards. So then all these other companies like Walmart and Target and other big e-commerce companies in turn felt pressure to speed up their delivery times. So and I think one of the things I talk about in the book is the ways in which Amazon has like historically and still emphasized that sort of instant gratification, that sense of like it's going to come quickly in time, like you buy it and then they'll let you know it's going to come in 2 days, and then the day of, or they'll let you know it's shipped, and then the day of they'll be like, it's coming, it's coming, it's coming, and build up all this anticipation so that you have this tremendous payoff when the thing arrives, or you get a photo that it arrived. So that's one thing that I do think about in the book. I think about it in relation to both the impact that it has on workers, as you say, the stress, the way, in fact, that these fast delivery times, especially on cheap items, means that Amazon loses money, right? So you might get free shipping on an item because you're a Prime member and you bought just like a $10 thing. But it might cost close to that or even more to get it to you in a day. So Amazon has been willing to do this kind of loss leading to keep people enclosed within its platform products and services. So I thought about, what it would, as you have noticed, that Amazon is actually trying to incentivize in subtle ways that people slow down their shipments. So now if you're a Prime member, they'll say, have everything come on your Prime day, like 1 day a week, or we'll give you $1, as you say, to like renting a movie or something, if you have a slightly slower shipping time. But they are, not making that connection, which I think it would be good to do, of, the reasons why you might want to have a slower shipping time in terms of the stress, in terms of like how ridiculous it would be for a van to be making a special trip to drop, a book that you were interested in reading, a day earlier. And then the environmental impact, I think, is a big thing. So one thing that I learned in writing this book that really surprised me, because I think people, and I also, have felt like guilty about buying things online and having things be delivered and show up in boxes, and it feels lazy and it feels like, like this is so bad for the environment. But like geographers and scientists and people who look at this have said, their research suggests that e-commerce can be greener actually than going to the store, especially if you're someone who needs to drive to the store in a vehicle that uses gas. So there can be great efficiency in delivery vehicles going around neighborhoods and dropping things off, because one vehicle driving around is better than like 10 of us all getting in our cars and driving somewhere. But we know that it is not environmentally more friendly when things have to be delivered quickly, right? So when vehicles are making more trips than is truly necessary, anytime anything gets on a plane, your carbon advantages go out the window. And I think that's something that's also could be easily communicated to consumers. I think there's a lot of consumers that would care about that and would actually feel good about choosing those slower shipping options. It would save Amazon money, but Amazon doesn't want to introduce anything that introduces friction to shopping. Anything that suggests we should shop less or we should shop slower, I think is not, or gets us to think about those material costs of convenience on workers, on the environment. I don't think Amazon wants to introduce that. But I think it's a missed opportunity. I think it's something consumers could ask for too.
You mentioned the warehouse part of this as well. You had the opportunity to actually take a tour. And what I found interesting about that section was you talked about you did a nice job of keeping kind of two sets of eyes essentially. You talked about what you saw, but then you talked about this idea of kind of the unseen, what's kind of not being seen, and just how good actually Amazon is about creating or keeping that brand, that smile kind of in the front view always. Can you actually just walk us through a little bit about that, through that experience that you had?
Yeah, I mean, I think not everyone realizes that the fulfillment centers have public tours. I think that's something that Amazon decided to start doing in response to the kinds of reporting and concerns there were that these are not good jobs, that these are exploitative places. And so I actually did two tours. I did one in Massachusetts, which was for large items, and one in near the Toronto airport that's for small items. And so they had different kinds of setups. But both of these fulfillment centers, which is what they call them because they fulfill all our needs and desires, right? Had special rooms with a lot of like painted walls and signage to welcome guests on these tours. And it was all very closely choreographed and thought out. And I think even the sense of branding in the sense of like, we're fulfilling consumer needs and desires, we're succeeding in delivering things quickly. That continued throughout signage throughout the warehouse, like where workers would be walking by walls and are just constantly reminded, like, we've delivered this many things and like we've delighted this many consumers. So, it was a very kind of carefully put through, carefully thought out tour. And they talked a lot about the benefits to the employees. So I think, the pressure that reporting and different kinds of labor organizing efforts have put on Amazon, I believe have led Amazon to try to improve its benefits and be seen as an industry leader in things like what the minimum pay is, things like health insurance, parental leave, and a lot of educational benefits, which I think actually, is responding to the turnover piece, which is that a lot of people who go into those warehouses do not intend to stay there. And so, in fact, while they're there, if they have the time, of course, to do this, they can get a lot of their tuition paid for kind of high need careers. So yeah, so you do get to see a lot of what happens in the warehouse. Of course, you pause at short periods of time at different aspects. You do get to stand near some people who are doing work. But I think that seeing what someone does for like a minute or two is never really going to convey what they would be like to do that for 12 hours or 10 hours, I think. I think the typical shifts they described were 4 shifts of 10 hours a week, of 10 hours per week. So you don't get a sense of what it would be like to do that same thing for 10 hours a day. So I think when they really emphasize the technology and the algorithms and the computers and like how all those things make this magic happen. So in the end, I felt like I had been shown things but not really seen them. I had, been co-present with all the different machines and with some of the different jobs, but I'm not sure that I came away with a sense of what it would be really like to work in one of these fulfillment centers, because a lot of it is to do with the hours, with the repetition, and I think with the isolation too. So I think in the end, as someone who takes a tour, you're still relatively isolated from the day-to-day reality of what it would be like to work there. And I think the workers are also pretty isolated from each other, because this is a thing where you're slotted in and you do your thing and a computer tells you what to do, motion by motion. So I can understand why it can be challenging to organize in these spaces, and why there's only been one successful unionization effort so far. um, Amazon has a clear sense of everything that's happening all the time through their computing technologies, but, I don't think workers and certainly tour goers do not really have a strong sense.
Yeah, thank you. I think it's something else that Amazon does really well, and I give credit to any company that is willing to pay tuition. I think that's important. We love education. I think that's a great opportunity. Um, I, I had on the show Dr. Elena Esposito, and she talked about algorithms. You've mentioned algorithms a couple of times yourself, how useful they are, especially to someone like Amazon. What Dr. Esposito was talking about was actually that in some ways there's so much data today now that it's almost impossible. The companies that she spoke to kind of were honest about the fact that in some ways we have so much now that we're not even 100% sure what to do with it. But here's the key thing about Amazon. Because Amazon is so good about getting into things early and actually how they structure things, would you say that perhaps one of the reasons why they were able to rise to this is that early on they understood this importance of the algorithm of data, and but not just simply gathering data, because that's only one side of the equation, right? A lot of people, a lot of companies gather data today, but they don't know what to do with it. They don't know how to manage it. Whereas it seems to me that Amazon early on got the idea of getting good, purposeful data in short chunks. And maybe they learned that through the data they just received in implementing even those reviews. What data are we getting? I find it fascinating how good they are at knowing what data to get and how to use it.
Yeah, I don't know if I can speak as much to their choices about what data to get, but I think like other, platform companies, they see that there is, or that maybe at some point there will be value to data that they gather and about consumer behavior. So I think that Jeff Bezos himself and the people he gathered around him early on were, computer engineers and software designers, and understood that power of data from really early on. They were, I think, again, in the mid 90s, not just looking at what people bought, but like looking, gathering data about their behavior on the site, like things that they looked at, even like where mouses go and things like that. You can collect it and then you can decide later, if you're going to use it. But yeah, in e-commerce where there's potentially so many products, then, they were able to start using these data for things like recommendations, nudges, right? Not just delivering a thing that you've asked for, but like nudging you towards things you didn't know you wanted, or refining that search algorithm to, help you find things so quickly, so in very high in your search, that so you have that sense of like gratification or certainty about the thing that's just the thing that you want. So, and they've gone on. I mean, I think part of their business model, which is adding more and more products and services, and then bundling them a lot of times in the Prime membership, is about, gathering a very unique data set that is going to be distinctive to what is available, say, just from a rival like Google, or from other, say, third-party companies that are tracking your behavior. So they collect data about, what we search for, what we buy. Now they can connect that to the entertainment that we like to look at or have searched for. They can connect that to rhythms and behaviors in our homes, right? If you use an Alexa, or if you have a Ring doorbell, or use other kinds of smart home technologies. And so they can if you go to Whole Foods Market, right, they bought a grocery store, that was a form of data they didn't have good information about, was people's grocery shopping or what they do in a brick and mortar situation. So they have the most valuable, I would say, consumer data of any company. And they don't just, they don't sell their data, right? They only sell advertising products to third parties on the basis of the data. So they are always, looking for new ways for us to be spending more time or doing more different types of things within the Amazon quote unquote ecosystem, so that they can either immediately monetize that data, or use that data to make their products and services even more personalized, even more convenient, even harder to move away from, because even just building a stickiness to Amazon's platform products and services itself is, a good business move. And so, yeah, they probably know us better than we know ourselves, and they'll look for opportunities to keep us engaging with them in a way that might immediately make them money, or that they'll think about, okay, well, what can we do with this data? How can we do this to refine products and services, or to suggest things that people aren't yet doing, or to start a new business that we didn't have yet?
You mentioned, of course, its eventual movement into content creation and even distributing content, media, right, as well. Something that happened to me. I'm a huge fan of Christmas. I love my Christmas specials, and some years back, I started buying them on Amazon. That way, I could just store them right there, and then when Christmas rolls around, oh, there they are. I can just play them whenever I want. Until one year, I went to go play one of my Christmas specials, and it was gone. And I'm sitting there going, what happened to it? I know I bought this. Where did it go? And so I, like most people do, I contacted Amazon and said, "Hey, because I thought maybe, oh, well, somehow it just got lost in some way." And it turns out I got a notice back from them that there was a license restriction placed on it. And as soon as that license restriction was removed, I could see it again. And that opened up a whole new discussion in my mind, because in some ways Amazon was able to redefine purchase, bought, own, ownership, right? I realized in that moment, oh, wait a second. I never bought this at all, and I don't own it. And it turns out, I did a little bit of research here as well, because I had wondered as I was reading this, you bring this up in the book, did anyone ever file suit? And it turns out Amanda Caudell in 2020 filed a class action suit. She had bought Puss in Boots to show for her kids. And for some reason, just the timing of it, right away after she bought it, she never even got to see it once. It went into license restriction. And so she brought this class action suit in 2020, and it was dismissed. So we're kind of moving this a little bit toward the end here, but I want you to just, if you can, just speak a little bit to even how has Amazon kind of changed our language and the way we even approach. It's a company that sells, but in some areas we don't actually get to buy. That's amazing. How did that happen?
Yeah, I mean, Amazon, I think it's a thing that's not just happened with Amazon, right? It's part of the whole move towards streaming and subscriptions, which is tremendously advantageous, right, to these media companies, because you can only, say with a Netflix, right, you can only see that Netflix content if you're still subscribing. So you never really get to buy the Netflix content. So Amazon, when it started to get into distributing media content electronically, it actually started with something that was more similar to its retail model, because it had been selling CDs and DVDs for a long time. And then its first models were called Amazon Unboxed, and it was the idea that you could do like a digital download of the music, or perhaps the video content that you wanted to see. And then but it has moved over time into more this sort of streaming model. And again, the idea, of course, that you could buy, but really what you're doing is just, you have the ability to just always watch, to always stream. You're never really downloading it, right? But to always stream content that's going to be in your quote unquote library. So no doubt they, when you press purchase, there's fine print. You could look at an agreement somewhere that says, yeah, you don't actually own this. You just have the right, and the advantage then to Amazon too is, oh, you're going to maintain your Amazon account. Otherwise, if you don't have an account, you can't continue to watch this. Right. So we're going to keep our platform sticky to in that way. And we get to, if you're streaming this item from us, even if it's in your library, we get to know more about you. We collect data every time you do something on our platform. There's a great book called The End of Ownership that, if you're interested in this topic, that you can check out. So I think it's something that Amazon moved towards, I think, in parallel, right, with like the Netflixes and the Hulus of the world. And they now have a very complicated media streaming set of services that's like, there's originals for streaming, there's stuff that's licensed for streaming, you can rent it, you can buy it, there's some stuff that's free with ads. I mean, it's kind of a mess, but they just move things around, I think, to figure out this sort of optimum blend of like keeping people motivated to be Prime members, but still getting revenue, still gaining data about people. And yeah, and now we don't own media typically in the way that we used to. And there's so much convenience that's come with that. But yeah, there's also a kind of loss, including the one that you described.
I want to draw this conversation to a close with something that might be on the minds of our audience listening. And that is, if one searches Amazon right now, he or she can find your book. Now, that's interesting. And actually, maybe I should say this. One thing that I really appreciated about your book is it does not read as if you're just bashing Amazon. That's not it. The point is, it's an exploration, a careful, detailed exploration of a business model and a business and how that is able to really gain deep access into our culture. And that's important for us to I think know and to learn for the future as well, and eventually to even think about what do we like about this and what don't we like about this. Both are equally important here. But your book is on Amazon, and you do take strong looks at what Amazon does. Now, for people who might, smirk and think in a cynical way, haha, you're on Amazon, I would like to offer this. In some ways, this kind of proves your point even more. Because people who write a book generally do so because they feel like they have something important that they need to say, that people need to hear. And in order to get that idea, that book, in front of the most people possible, you have to go to Amazon. And so, my question to you is this. How has, because you do talk about this in the book as well, how has Amazon in some ways really impacted not even just the distribution of products and services? How has Amazon, in some sense, really reached into the idea of distribution of ideas with its publishing practices and the ways that it even approaches publishing?
Yeah. So yeah, Amazon is kind of almost required. I mean, I'm sure might be some people who sell books, and I don't know if there's publishers who are not selling on Amazon, but I think publishers are not happy about their dependence on Amazon. So early on, they were so excited. There was this new, kind of like all third-party sellers, there's this new distribution channel for books, and there are and were some really good things about the way Amazon works. So it's really good for going deep into the catalog. So traditional bookstores, it tends to just be the latest books or the best sellers that sell, but Amazon was great for the long tail, right? Like all those smaller titles or older titles that could be rediscovered, or if you like an author, you can find all the other things that they wrote and maybe find used copies, and so that there's a lot of advantages. You know, one's selling rank on Amazon, and the visibility on Amazon can then impact how likely your book is to be sold even in other channels. So again, it's kind of like it becomes like infrastructural or like a utility. It's like the place, for creating visibility and also for people to learn about your book. So we talked about this earlier, like you might not buy the book on Amazon. I know a lot of people who very consciously did not purchase the book on Amazon because they didn't want to support it, and I support their choice. But also Amazon was a great place for them to find out about it to maybe look at some of the pages that are made visible, to see any reviews that are there. So Amazon, in a way, provides these information commodities. And Amazon now has moved into publishing. I mean, I think that speaking to your broader question of how Amazon, is shaping the distribution of information, it's become a major publisher. And it's by far the place where most people are doing self-publishing. So I think, again, thinking about there's ways in which Amazon's size and the way it uses its power are concerning, but there's also these opportunities that it's opened up. So, you can self-publish on Amazon, and that book can be distributed as an ebook, or it can be a print-on-demand book. So someone can order a print copy and it can be printed and then sent to them within days. So that has really created an outlet for self-expression and for some people to even support themselves, and become essentially professional writers through self-publishing. And there's a lot of interesting scholarship being done about this. But Amazon, I think, helped put that self-publishing model on the map in a way that other platforms hadn't. In fact, my own father has self-published multiple books on the platform and gets a lot of satisfaction out of it. And it means that his friends and family, like all over the world, right, can buy that book. And that was a reason why I wanted my book available. I know people who wanted to buy the book that actually couldn't get it another way where they were. Even though, by the way, you can get it other places. You can get it from regular bookstores, you can get it from Barnes and Noble, and you can read the ebook for free on the MIT Press Direct site if you want. So yeah, I think, my ultimate feeling was like, I think workers are doing a lot of great activism and organizing about shedding light, meaningful light on the costs of convenience, what those are behind the scenes at Amazon. I think sellers are in a hard position to be resisting or calling Amazon out because they are so dependent on Amazon. And if they annoy Amazon, it could actually destroy their business if they get put on some kind of blacklist there. So the note I end the book on is like, hey, I think consumers should become more involved in this, right? We should be more organized. We're very isolated as consumers in our homes with our little boxes showing up and talking to our little Alexas. But we actually have this thing in, 160 million households who are Prime members have this big thing in common. And, a lot of these choices and the things that Amazon does are being done in our name. So my sense is that consumers need to connect, right? The sort of everydayness of our relationship with Amazon with our power as citizens, and encourage lawmakers, who I think have the most leverage, right, to put reasonable expectations and maybe parameters and boundaries, and to right size Amazon's market power and political power, and to be more vocal and organized in suggesting that, these things come about.
I think that's a perfect way to bring this to an end. There are certainly concerns, but there's also a tremendous amount of potential for good that could be done as well with that, especially with that distribution power and with that model that it really helped quite a bit. I'm glad you brought that up. That idea of the self-publishing model, that really did help a lot of people who were having a lot of difficulty breaking in to different presses to get their book published. I think that's a phenomenal thing as well. Emily, thank you so much for joining us today and sharing this information. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me. This was fun.
Should we fear the power that companies like Amazon now wield? The ways in which they are able to shift our culture? I'll be honest and say, I'm not sure. Comedian George Carlin seemed to think so, and he was a pretty smart guy. Here's what I am sure of. The culture of humanity is never a linear thing. We grow, we evolve, we find despair, we generate hope. It's what we do best as a species. I remain hopeful that the vast majority of human beings would rather produce something that fosters good in the world than produce something evil. For me, the key is information. We must make sure we continually evaluate where we are as a people and be prepared to make adjustments in order to bring the focus of our culture back to the human being. If that makes me naive, so be it. Until next time, try to keep one foot firmly planted on neutral ground. and have a great day.